What's up, everybody? I'm Dusty from DE Studios, and today we bring you a brand new segment, Diverse Audiobooks, where we provide free audiobooks. And today's audiobook, I've said audiobook quite a bit, but today's audiobook is Death's Embrace, and this is Chapter 1, The Red March. But before I get into that, you may notice, if you've been on this channel before, that we did upload a Chapter 1. It wasn't called The Red March, but it was a Chapter 1. We actually just took that down and replaced it with this because we believed we could make a much better version, most notably custom sound effects. And the second thing is voice actors, with us actually doing the voice acting, though it is our first attempt at voice acting, so they are a little rough. And lastly, music. Now, we didn't make our own custom music, we're just simply not that talented, but we did get music from a very special, very creative YouTuber by the name of Ross Bugden. The link to his channel is in the description below. I urge you to go check him out. Very good tracks, very good music. Keep that up. And also, speaking of changes, you can actually make a change by interacting with us, whether it just be in the YouTube comment section or taking a step further and visiting our Patreon, where you can get real, genuine rewards through a little bit of donation, starting as low as $1 a month. And lastly, because this is a new concept for us, and we're trying to be as original as possible with original content written by us, voiced by us, and in some cases, custom sound effects made by us. We want you to give us constructive criticism. Let us know what worked for you, let us know what ideas can be improved, and let us know what you think this can become in the future. We're excited to see what you have to come up with. And at the very least, if you like this chapter, even though the voice acting is a little rough, and music placement, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure you turn those notifications on so you do not miss out on another chapter of Death's Embrace or any other audiobook we provide here. But without further ado, Death's Embrace, Chapter 1, The Red March. Let's begin. The sun provides life and sustenance to all of planet Earth. The Sun is 92.96 million miles away from Earth and nearly 330,000 times as massive. In 2017, I know these facts, and more, but on August 5th, 513 CE, the years in which I was originally alive, all I could think is that the Sun is hot. I remember that day too well. My unit and I were returning home from a failed campaign. We were tasked with overtaking the final stronghold, Kel, in the southern province. Countless strategies had failed, and my poor leadership led many honorable men to their deaths. In my 22 years of military service, I had never tasted the bitterness of defeat. Now, I had no choice. But I couldn't think about the details now. The blistering heat muddled my mind. The heat was further intensified by the mountain of steel armor that my men and I wore. The hilt of our swords burned to the slightest touch. But even all this heat couldn't cloud the towering resentment I could feel from the thousands of soldiers behind me. I couldn't even manage to turn my head, so I locked my eyes forward and continued to march on. A moment of relief did come, however, when night fell, and when we proceeded to assemble our tents. For the first time in my career, I refused my men's help in assembling my tent. I did it alone, though I imagine I lacked much finesse. For what seemed like hours, but was actually just 20 minutes, the tent had been assembled. At least partially. However, I didn't care how it looked. I just wanted to escape. I just wanted a escape. I burst through what I had hoped was the door and immediately began stripping away at my armor. As the metal clanks piled up on the floor, I noticed my woolen shirt was a completely different color from this morning. Sweat, I mumbled as I proceeded to free myself from its sticky grasp. After indulging in the clean, brisk air, I noticed something. I'm standing with only a patch of linen hiding my dangly bits. With peerless speed, I threw my arm out my tent and onto my rucksack. I pulled it in and quickly unveiled the top flap, which revealed a spare pair of woolen shirt and trousers. Upon feeling this relief, one name rushed into my mind. Mora. But the happy remembrance of my wife was quickly shattered by the loud clomp clomp which belonged to my sergeant. I swiftly jumped into my trousers and threw on my shirt. Maybe too swiftly, seeing as my shirt was on backwards. I quickly swung it the right way round, and he walked inside.
"Commander,"
he began, with a courtesy bow following afterwards. Much like his enormous feet, my sergeant, Morrison, is a tall, stout man. If his sheer size didn't intimidate you, then his abnormally sized two-handed steel claymore would. Of course, a man of his strength would only need one hand to use it. If not for ducking, his scar-riddled face would have forced my tent down on top of me. Of course, now come to think of it, a light breeze might do just that. Sergeant Morrison? Anything to report? I asked.
There is something, sir.
He admitted.
But first, how are you doing? I mean this with much respect, but you look unwell. The men and I are growing concerned.
Morrison did have a point. My hair, which would normally be black, bore shades of red, blood from the victims of my double-edged broadsword. My pale body was now home to dozens of small cuts, blood, dirt, and sores. My wounds were never properly cleaned or bandaged from our last battle. My body smelled of blood, mud, and curdled milk. Needless to say, if my wife were to lay eyes on me, she'd chase me off with a stick. Oh, and I could feel my stomach eating on something that wasn't conventional food. I could at least do for an extra meal. Though an extra meal wouldn't be possible, a point that Morrison was about to make abundantly clear. I'm fine, but while you're here, maybe you want to comment on my tent.
It's fine, sir. It looks
I could see Morrison wrestling with different words in his head.
rustic.
Rustic, I murmured. Otherwise known as shit, much like our current situation.
Don't even start. We've been over this. The men harbor no ill will against you.
Then who? I'm the commander for King David's armies, and when I return, I'll be...
Stop right there. You're William.
William, my name. Maybe it was due to the heat, or the doubt that swirled in my head. Whatever it was, it nearly denied me recognition for my own name. He continued.
You're the finest commander in the known world, and that's not me saying that. Your feats alone have granted you that much. Surely King David will show mercy.
And if he doesn't?
Then run. You, Moore, and Clarice can start elsewhere and be free. King David owes you at least that much.
What you suggest is treason.
Anything I suggest will be treason.
He remarked. Enough of this. I'll hear no more on the subject. A moment of silence took hold. Did you come here for a purpose, Sergeant, or was it for naught? I asked, wanting to be alone.
It's about the men.
The men? What do you mean?
Before coming here, I took inventory of our remaining food and water. We have enough to maybe last us 4 days. 5 if we grow more strict on rations.
More strict? The rations we're giving them now barely provide enough energy for them to fit their steel cuirass. And you would have me grow more strict?
Sir, I feel slick as oil for even suggesting it. But we need to face reality. It's likely that none of us will make it home at this pace.
Then we change our pace.
How do you propose we do that, sir? We're a throng of 6,000 strong and we're burdened with countless resources. Unless you can provide a miracle, sir, it will take us at least 9 days to reach home.
Then I will provide a miracle.
You shouldn't jest, William.
I'm not. Leave me with this tonight, and I'll have an answer by dawn. Morrison gave another bow and departed. Upon his departure, I really began to doubt my confident stance on the issue. I can't create miracles. How the hell was I going to do this? I couldn't send my men to gather food or water. There's no way of knowing where it would be, and we definitely couldn't spare the time it would take. I rattled my brain with ideas, starting with practical ones. Growing more desperate, I even prayed for my supplies to be replenished by morning. Suffice it to say, I am not a man of God, or anything supernatural. So after dabbling into that pool, I decided a change in positions would be best. I lied down and pressed my head atop my rucksack, turning it into a makeshift pillow. I was sound asleep before another thought could surface. Clearly my body was not on the same page as my mind. It wanted rest, regardless of the issue at hand, though my mind still had more control, seeing as I woke after a measly 4 hours. Hell, I rose before the sun. After realizing my mind wouldn't allow any more rest, I sprang into action. I say action, but really all I did was pace back and forth, because that accomplished so much last night. I did this for hours, but to no avail, until I saw my gritty reflection in my dirt-encrusted helmet. I let out a slight smile. At least I thought it was a smile. Hard to tell from that helmet. With newly discovered confidence, I emerged from my tent. Good timing, too, seeing as the whole thing came crashing down just moments later. But my men's attention was not fixed on the tent. Their focus was on me, their commander, who by all appearances may have gone a bit mad. I don't blame their doubtful looks. After all, I wasn't in my battle dress. Instead, I was wearing a shirt, trousers, leather boots, gloves, and a belt that held my sword in its scabbard. The only piece of armor was atop my head, and it wobbled back and forth between strides. Morrison! I called out as soon as he came into view.
Commander?
He asked, not convinced that it was me. Yes? I assured in a demanding tone. I have found a solution to our problem.
Is that why you look so...
I could see him picking his next word carefully.
Odd.
I was going to say peculiar.
Well spoken. Hey, where's Edward?
Where else, with his precious trebuchets?
Well, that's convenient.
I added, further expanding the cloud of confusion that rested over Morrison's head.
And while I'm speaking with Edward, follow the men in formation.
I ordered just before jogging over to our siege equipment. Morrison stood there, finger in air, begging for answers. I waved him off, knowing he'll get them. Soon. They all will. A mere 10 feet away, I called out.
Edward, good morning!
The surprise had Edward jumping frantically.
Commander, you look...
Peculiar?
Not the word I'd use.
I'm sorry, what?
Never mind, to what do I owe the honor, Sir William?
He asked respectively, urgently trying to change topics.
2 things, actually. First, you can drop the formalities. I've known you since you were a young lad. Secondly, I'd like to know your professional opinion on our new and improved trebuchets.
I could see his face fill with excitement. Edward may be young, but he is a protege regarding siege warfare. That same genius, however, sees him on the side of resentment and respect from the other older engineers. Despite that, he relished in the opportunity to talk about his precious equipment.
I thought you'd never ask. The new angle and tensioning rope allowed...
I'm pressed for time, Edward, so excuse me for being rude. Do they meet your expectations?
No worries, Commander, and yes, they exceed them.
And if you had to leave them here, could you replicate this back home?
After I asked that, his joy quickly switched to concern.
Why would I leave?
Just answer the question, Edward.
Yes, I could, but it'd be unnecessary and time-consuming. The materials I use to make these are unique to this region. We won't find this in or around Exidium.
But you could.
I asked once more. He reassured me with a simple nod.
Good.
I spoke as I unsheathed my blade and sliced the tensioning rope that held the trebuchet in place.
What the hell, William?
Well, I did ask you to drop the formalities.
I spoke as I drenched the base of the trebuchet in steaming coal-colored oil.
What are you doing, Commander?
He asked in a more respectful tone.
Don't worry. I'd be upset too for what I'm about to ask you.
I assured him while cupping the back of his neck with my hand.
Sir?
Burn them, Edward. All of them. You said you can replace them, and that's what you'll have to do. Back home.
But why, sir? These are in pristine condition. We needn't rush.
He stopped the moment my facial expression changed to show grave concern.
We needn't rush, right, Commander?
Just do as I say, Edward. Everything will become clear momentarily.
I left on that unsatisfactory note. After just a few steps, I turned to see if Edward had begun to move, but to my surprise, he hadn't. Instead, he was just staring, but not at me, at what seemed like nothing. It took but a moment for me to realize that he wasn't looking at anything, but instead he was thinking about what I said, perhaps. I was certain that's exactly what it was, as the anxiety washed over his face. The moment my gaze met his, it severed whatever train of thought he had, and he walked toward the trebuchets. I proceeded to walk also, but with my mind fixed on Edward. I don't blame him for being worried. That's just the type of man that Edward was, and like all men, he also feared the unknown. After leaving both Edward and Morrison in the dark, I felt it was high time for me to inform them on my plan, and to inform the thousands of men on the risk that we all face. To my surprise, Morrison already assembled the men, and after centering myself in front of them, I began.
Normally, I'd begin a speech with, "Good day, my fellow brethren." But today is anything but good, as has this past year. Sergeant Morrison believes you do not doubt me, as do I, but I doubt myself. And why shouldn't I? My arrogance and eagerness to finish this failed campaign led many proud men to their deaths. I know what awaits me back home, though I do not fear the hangman's noose. What I do fear is watching another brother of mine fall before my very eyes, which is why what I'm about to tell you is something that would normally be withheld from you. Our rations, they are running low. By this time 4 days from now, we have completely run out of both food and water. As you know, we're at least 9 days from home. I trust you with this information, so I beg you to trust me once more. And if you do trust me, as Morrison suggests, then you will unfasten and drop your armor.
And to my surprise, they did just that. I couldn't resist the smile. I released my sword from its scabbard, and I rose it above my head.
We were told of the savage uprising in the West, and that it could not be defeated. We did not fall then. We were told of a civil war forming in the East, and that the storm could not be quelled. We did not fall then. We will never fall again. Not to the might of the sun, not to the burden of hunger or thirst. That's why I ask you to leave everything behind, aside from your weapon, clothes, and a single bag of what you hold most dear. We will never fall again. That is the promise that I make you.
I solidified that promise with a nasty cut to my hand. I thrusted the sword into the ground, and I watched as the blood rushed out and onto my fingertips. I then gripped my helmet tight and removed it from my head. It then fell, blood-stained, and dug itself deep into the sand in front of me. With that, the cheers rippled throughout the columns of soldiers.
Now break formation and gather your belongings. We leave in 10.
I turned to find a disapproving look resting on Morrison's face.
Was that really necessary, William?
The men needed to know our situation.
That's not what I meant, and you know it.
The noose.
Jesting so candidly about dying won't motivate these men to move any faster.
It wasn't for their benefit. It was for mine. I needed a reality check. We both know what awaits me when I return. Failure to seize a stronghold is one thing, but abandoning all these resources to be found and possibly used against us later, that's another thing entirely. I'll be lucky to just have the noose fitted around my neck.
I could see Morrison trying to find the words to comfort me, but I didn't need them.
If you would, please go fetch me Ellie. That's in order,
I added to provide haste, and as he raced off, I found myself chuckling at the thought. That may very well be the last order that I give. Regardless of what loomed in the distance, I could always count on smiling when I laid my eyes on Ellie. Ellie was my trusted steed, and even though you couldn't see it now because of her battle dress, her coat was the color of darkness on a moon-free night. I found myself stroking her mane, like always, and losing myself in her glossy black eyes. Noticing my awareness, or lack thereof, Morrison called out.
Sir!
I broke free and began.
Take her to the wounded, and have them take turns riding her.
But William, your feet
Are fine. We needn't make this journey any worse for them. Now go!
And with that, he was gone. While he was away, I just stared at the men discarding what was left of their tents and armor. Some proceeded to kick their helmets away as if they were leather balls, only to find that the helmets offered a bit more resistance. I then focused on those who themselves seemed like they stared at nothing, still confused about what was going on. I smiled, and then the smile grew even larger as my men fell back into formation and with much more energy than before. Almost immediately afterwards, Morrison secured a place next to me and awaited my command. Sergeant, take your scouts and ride on ahead. Ensure that no surprises find us. With that and a simple snap of his fingers, he and a dozen of his men on horseback rode off into the muddled, shimmering heat that belonged to this bright summer day. Before beginning our long and impossible journey, I slid the men a much-needed reassuring look. A look that screamed, "We're going to get through this, together." After receiving those same looks from the thousands of men standing before me, I nodded at Edward. He and his men then threw their lit torches onto the black, glimmering oil that enveloped the wooden base of our siege equipment. Many fires erupted and stretched into the heavens. The immense fire rekindled something that my men and I thought we'd lost: hope. With this newfound strength, we began the long march home. I'd love to sit here and regale you with a story on how our journey was a testament to human courage and perseverance. However, that'd be a lie. The first day didn't hold many problems for us, aside from the painful blisters that formed on our feet. That being an exception, our desire and motivation to get back home held strong throughout the day. Nothing of the sort could be said for our second day. Old injuries and fatigue saw to our struggles, and many of the men found themselves consuming their more than fair share of rations. Day 3 was utter chaos. Dozens of men were sick with violence after realizing they had stripped themselves of their own rations a day early. Thefts ran rampant, which resulted in the untimely deaths of many men. My attempts to end these quarrels landed me at the mercy of a blood-soaked sword. It was at that moment that I realized we were no longer acting as a unit, but as individual men, trying to survive. Day 4 was surprisingly tranquil, though our lack of energy due to dehydration, hunger, and heat didn't allow for much else. In fact, whatever energy did remain, my men and I used to shuffle our tired limbs through the now grassy, open landscape, a landscape that held our home somewhere in the distance. By midday, I couldn't resist the urge in using my tongue to scrape whatever saliva I could find off the roof of my mouth. Almost instantly, my troubles faded when I laid my eyes on a familiar hilltop. A rush of excitement, equal parts desperation, provided me with a burst of energy, which I used to sprint to this white and pink flower-dressed paradise. Upon reaching it, a wave of relief washed over me. There it was, in the not-too-far distance, the towering city walls of Exidium, our kingdom. After expressing several tears of joy, my heat-stricken brothers joined alongside me. However, their faces didn't mirror joy, but instead, uncertainty. Our minds had tricked us with illusions before. Maybe, just maybe, this was another one. I shook my head feverishly. It couldn't be. This had to be real. It needed to be real. We won't last another day. I asked Sergeant Morrison to ride ahead to secure our entry, and he did, but with a bit of reluctance. On his departure, I could feel his doubt. In fact, I could feel all of their doubts. After only an hour more of dragging our feet, those doubts fell flat, much like our hands on the cobblestone pillars that stood sternly before Exidium's city gates. Morrison stood before me with a newfound confidence and shame. I bestowed him with a forgiving series of pats on his back. We then braced ourselves for the moment we'd been waiting for. Following the opening of the gates was the welcome light, sight, and smell of the city's marketplace. Though whatever dignity remained in my men was checked at the gates, they rushed the market and its vendors. Anger and confusion swirled around the marketplace, and I quickly assumed the role of peacekeeper. I had to assure the vendors they weren't being raided, but instead providing much-needed sustenance to the knights of Exidium. After promising appropriate coin for their service, the daunting task was over. One of the vendors tossed me an apple, which was soon drowned in my own tears. "We made it," I thought expressively. I turned to watch the comforting madness. Men were eating meat, raw or cooked, and others threw their faces in pits of water, dirty or not. A cool calmness took over after realizing that my men's troubles were over. But an emerging feeling of concern quickly superseded after remembering my troubles were just beginning. I couldn't resist the urge in bringing my hand to my throat, where the hangman's noose would certainly soon take hold. It was then that I could feel the icy touch of death's embrace.